We have now a panel consisting of the speakers you just heard, and we have 3 more people on this podium to discuss the issues we heard the presentations on. To connect to what we had this morning, this is exactly what we were discussing this morning when we got the question, where is the debate around GMOs, biotechnology, in the circles who discuss it in wider context, where has it moved to? Well, I guess you've gotten a very nice display of people and the issues and themes that where we have moved to. We are debating it in broader terms. We are considering it in a contextualized form. That's definitely a move away from where it was in the 90s, where it was basically discussed as a singular issue, decontextualized, if you wish, pro and con, and so on, and now it has moved on to a contextual issue, contextualized within the agro-food system, and to much more fundamental themes. How did we get in the place where we are in the first place, and how can we move out of it, and where can we go? So you've heard the 4 speakers. Right now I would like to introduce to you the 3 new people who are joining us here on the podium. You know the other 4. I start to my right with Jochen Koester. He's a president of AgroTrace, a board member of an industrial association for food without genetic engineering, VLOG, I think is what you say, yeah? And the ProTerra Foundation. He's a consultant on EU regulations on mandatory GMO labeling, as well as on national voluntary GMO-free claims here in Europe. So he has been, I know him since many, many years. He has been active also in Brazil, in South America, and North America. He's a true cosmopolitan, and he understands the value chains, the food and the commodity, I must say, value chains of maize and other commodity crops very well, and is very informed about where the status of the non-GM supply lines are and how much there is of in the world. So I'm glad you're here and you can join us. To my left is Amadeus Zschunke. He is the director of Sativa Rheinau AG. Sativa Rheinau AG plays a leading role in the breeding of organic seeds, also selling the seeds, producing the seeds, and creating seeds. New varieties for organic farming that are developed and building on old seed breeds, as I understand, modernizing them, making them available to farmers. And next to him sits Dr. Eva Galinsky. She's also into the seed business. She's a member of the Federal Ethics Committee on Non-Human Biotechnology here in Switzerland. She's a scientific advisor at ProSpecies Rara, a Swiss non-profit organization with the aim to save endangered livestock and endangered seeds, plants, varieties from extinction. They collaborate quite a bit with Co-op. Those who live in Switzerland, I'm sure, know the label of ProSpecies Rara and hopefully are busy consumers of it. One way to keep it alive and keep them up to date. Both of them, I think I'd like to start with you to explain to us. I posed a question to both of you, I think. In light of our discussions about genetic engineering and the terms, the branding of the new genetic engineering techniques as being new breeding techniques, which I consider a capture, a hijacking of a term. What is breeding, and to what degree do you think the definitions or understanding of breeding in that term in the new biotechnology or new genetic engineering techniques matches up with your understanding of breeding or not? That I'd like to, because you're experts in breeding, that's what you do.
Vielen Dank für die Frage. Ich werde auf Deutsch antworten, weil es mir erlaubt, etwas differenzierter mich auszudrücken. Ich hoffe, dass die kein Deutsch können, sich mit Headsets können bedienen. Der Begriff der Züchtung hat sich eigentlich sehr verändert, und für uns als praktische Züchter muss ich sagen, teile ich eigentlich nicht die Ansicht, dass man diese neuen Methoden so sinnvoll oder so interessant sie sein können auch immer, da kann man eigentlich nicht zur richtigen Züchtung dazu zählen, sondern für uns als praktische Züchter ist die Züchtung eigentlich die Arbeit, die wir auf dem Feld machen. Das heißt, die direkte praktische Arbeit, der Austausch mit dem Standort, was sehr wichtig ist, dass man eben wirklich die praktischen Standorte mit einbezieht in die Arbeit. Und ich finde, Sie haben heute Morgen auch sehr schön gezeigt, das Beispiel von der BT-Resistenz, wo man eigentlich sich dann auch fragen muss, welche Methoden denn schneller sind. Wir hören immer das Argument heute, dass diese neuen Techniken sehr viel Zeit sparen können. Und es ist meiner Ansicht nach eine Frage des Standpunkts, wenn man die Geschwindigkeit bestimmen will, wenn man einen züchterischen Fortschritt erreichen will, welche Methode letztlich dann schneller ist. Die Methoden, die heute entwickelt wurden, in der letzten Zeit entwickelt wurden, aus der Gentechnik heraus, auch diese neuen sogenannten Züchtungsmethoden, die können unter Umständen auch interessant sein, aber sie haben im besten Fall eigentlich ergänzenden Charakter und sind nicht die eigentliche Züchtung.
Ja, ich möchte vielleicht noch ergänzen, erst als Negativbeispiel eine bereits existierende Apfelsorte zu nehmen, die schon viele Jahre auf dem Markt ist und diese mit Hilfe auch einer von diesen neuen Methoden mit einem Resistenzgen auszustatten. Dann hat man einen Gala zum Beispiel mit einer Feuerbrandresistenz, das würde ich auch nicht als Züchtung bezeichnen. Mir ist immer noch im Kopf, was wir damals bei unserer Diskussion über die Rheinauer Thesen zur ökologischen Pflanzenzüchtung besprochen haben. Da hatten wir das Bild Züchtung als Gespräch. Das finde ich immer noch sehr schön, denn es drückt aus, dass Züchtung idealerweise nicht nur eine einseitige Geschichte sein sollte. Ein Züchter, eine Züchterin drückt einer Pflanze eine bestimmte Entwicklungsrichtung auf, sondern es findet in der Tat eine Art Dialog statt zwischen Pflanze und Umwelt, aber auch zwischen Pflanze und Züchter.
So an interesting image of the communication, meaning, it's a contextual exercise, really, again, not decontextualized. Jochen, you've been very busy in the supply chain, so ensuring that the supply of not seeds but the harvested products are alive, and you were busy to ensure. I can remember discussions we had years ago when the narrative came out that there will not be non-GM seeds or non-GM commodities be available for feed and food anymore pretty soon, so you better switch and give up your fight. Can you remember that? And you were busy running around saying this is a lie, it's not true, and then engaged yourself in securing, as I understand, securing that supply of non-GM varieties. How is it today? Is it
well, essentially, the bottom line of what you just said, nothing has changed. The supply meets the demand. So if the demand increases, especially in the core commodity, which is soybeans or soybean meal for animal feed, if there's more demand, it may not be immediately available. Let's say there would be a huge jump, a huge increase in demand. It will not be immediately available, but it will not take too long, at most one season, And the thing is, at the moment, if I may just expand a little bit beyond of what you actually asked me, because that was the answer to your question already, Germany happens to be not only my mother country, but the biggest economy, not only in the EU, but in all of Europe, west of Russia. The German population, not to forget the Austrians as well, but we're talking about Germany right now, is the population rejects, in annual surveys that have been conducted, I think, for past 18 years, between 73 and 85% of the population in a 12 question catalog reject GMOs in their food, very, very distinctly. And at the same time, not most, but all, 100% of the German retailers are behind this and support this, and actually are working on completely, mind you, eliminating GMOs in the German animal feed production. Now, they need more and more, and the easier parts were dairy, were eggs, and all the derivatives, but and also poultry, big consumer. But now they're starting to work on the pork production. In other words, the pigs, and that is going to make a difference of another 2 million tons. That will be available, not from year now to year next, but over the next 3, 4, 5 years, it will be available.
Well, it's connecting a bit to the seed issue, because I've heard narratives and stories from the United States, for example, where some farmers, or also other countries, that had been into, well, the seed market is basically saturated. It's 85–95% GM in soybean and in maize. When farmers decide they want to get out of it, they don't find enough seeds anymore. So if you say within 2 years, if the demand comes up and people want to have more non-GM food supply, don't you have to produce first the seeds? Will that not take a few years before you have it and then supply them?
In principle, that is correct. But the thing is, especially since you mentioned the United States, that you have the non-GMO project and now some spin-offs that emulate that concept. The ABCDs, for all of those who drive cars or have seen cars, and all of us have, you know, Exxon and, you know, BP and Shell and all these companies, there's an equivalent in the agricultural sector, and they happen to be ABCD, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus, the French company. Now, these people, 5, 6 years ago, they would have rather died than even discussing non-GMO products with you. But today, actually ADM, the A, started 4 years ago when their board in the US decided that it was okay to import non-GMO soybeans from Brazil to the homeland of ADM, namely to the United States, in order to meet, because not enough seed were there at the time, to meet the explosively increasing demand for non-GMO soybeans in the United States. So that is turning the entire philosophy of the industry upside down. Now recently, Cargill, the largest of these four, they had one of their crushing plants in Europe converted to non-GMO a little bit before ADM again had another crushing plant converted in Germany to non-GMO. The time has completely, the whole industry is completely changing upside down. So the seed issues, yes, that has to be met, but for the time being, for an interim period, it will be compensated by shifting material from place A to place B.
How's the seed supply and demand working for the organic? Yeah, go ahead.
Nur ein Kommentar noch zu Cargill. Wir müssen auch ein bisschen aufpassen. Wir wissen inzwischen, dass der Zibusraps, der mit Oligonukleotid gerichteter Mutagenese hergestellt wurde, über Cargill vertrieben wird, und zwar exklusiv unter Non-GM. Und Cargill zahlt den Bauern, die diesen Raps anbauen, auch einen Premiumpreis dafür, weil sie genau gesehen haben, der Markt für Non-GM wächst. Aber da schmuggeln sie eben jetzt auch diese Geschichten rein, und wir versuchen von der EU-Kommission herauszufinden, ob das Zeug auch inzwischen nach Europa kommt. Und wir bekommen keine Antwort, überhaupt keine.
They only think in terms of dollars and cents, of course.
Well, I guess this all connects to the debate that we're having on trying to transform the agro-food system from the bottom up. And Michel had started the discussion on the panel here. And where's the precaution coming in when it is about transforming the agro-food system? I've been wondering, because precautionary principle applying to changing production systems, bringing in new forms of production or bringing in new types of seeds, new crops, wouldn't that also bear some risks and that need to be looked at ahead of time and have precaution? You have to share the microphone.
Yes, of course. So just as I was emphasizing the relative absence of sufficient anticipatory research in nanotech, biotech, ICT, obviously the logic is any newish thing also ought to have its modicum or appropriate amount of anticipatory research. I guess the difference is with agroecology, as the last speaker pointed out, we know a lot about nature in terms of traditional farming that's been done for years, and we know a lot about agroecological stuff. in principle, it doesn't look as alien, as it were, as GM does. So whereas you'd want to spend, in my view, 15% of the EU research budget making sure that biotechnology was, its hazards were anticipated, I wouldn't have expected that you needed to spend 15% of an agroecological budget. But that's up for grabs and discussion. These decisions aren't actually taken by the public. Those figures that I gave you are emergent properties of a complex system of giving grants by thousands of scientists to thousands of other scientists in little rooms. And what emerged was this stark comparison between money spent on product development and money spent on research. We should have an open discussion about it, and within that you'd say, well, if you're taking off with agroecological farming, how much research should we spend to try and anticipate the problems we might get from agroecological farming?
Well, certainly revamping the research agenda, I guess, would be.
Well, yes, I think we can say with some confidence that if we widen the circle of people who are taking decisions about what type of research, for whom, for what, then we may have very different questions. And indeed, even in an agroecological food sovereignty approach, we may have some emphasis on the precautionary principles for certain innovations. But maybe the precautionary principle would be extended to include social dimensions of change. You know, who's included, who's excluded, what are the gender impacts of that particular pathway? What are the impacts on younger people or disabled people or people of colour? So we might find that the precautionary principle, its boundaries would be extended from technical issues to social and institutional concerns, which would be fascinating, because that would invite more public debate, more reflection. But I think if you bring back citizens, or you put citizens centre stage in the definition of what a society should be doing research on, we would have very, very different questions to what we have currently. And in a transition to another model of agriculture and food system, there would be uncertainties. There would be things that we don't know. You know, there's the same phenomenon we have today is that we do not know what we do not know would apply. So we're also entering a period in the life of the planet where there's increasing uncertainty. There are things that have happened, and we don't know if we're reaching tipping points. We may be moving into completely different environments. So the knowledge that was available before may not be entirely appropriate. It needs to be updated.
Can I just add on that? The second function of the PP, as I said, is to open up debates about wider issues. That's its second function, you know. But linked to that, lay local traditional knowledge. In most of the case studies, the 34 case studies, you have found that the non-scientists, ordinary people who were using asbestos or playing with PCBs or the beekeepers in the beekeeper story, they got onto the fact that there was a problem usually decades before the scientists do. So in this broadening out of the discussion to ordinary people, we would probably help the anticipatory research in that way too, putting more weight on lay local traditional knowledge.
Les, you worked on the PP before in your previous life. Do you share that?
I'm not really the expert in that field. But
no, here, Les was the one who worked a lot on PP before in agriculture, and you moved then into the transformation issue.
Well, one of the talks earlier today, I think by David, referred briefly to the Commission communication on the precautionary principle in the year 2000, a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And a neglected aspect of that document was the opening up to alternative solutions which may avoid the uncertain risks that are being evaluated. So I see the relationship more the other way around, that the risk and uncertainty precaution discussions about a capital-intensive innovation, such as GM crops, then should open up a discussion along more fundamental lines. What is the problem supposedly being addressed by GM crops. And that itself is contentious. Right? But if one aspect is to avoid plant pests, well then what is the source? What makes farms susceptible to plant pests to the extent that they reduce yield, cause epidemics, and so on? And of course, from an agroecological perspective, one answer is the intensive methods, intensive monocultures, which have alternatives going back a long time. So that opens up a discussion about agroecological alternatives, both old and new.
Well, so, you want to say something? Yeah.
I think, you say we don't know what we don't know, but farmers know what they need. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, we don't know what we don't know. Maybe who's we? But I think if you go to the farmers, I mean, quite often they know what they need, and we've seen this. They actually realize that, all right, we have a problem with soil fertility, for example. So how do I now improve my soil fertility without ruining myself with fertilizer, for example? So I think some. But I think what's important is that we need to rethink the institutions, and this together with the farmers. I think that's the whole idea, and even also the consumers. I think we have to have this stakeholder discussion on what kind of new institution do we need to tackle the problems we have. You can't fix the problem, with the same thinking that created it. Einstein said that long ago. I think we're still trying quite often to use the old institutions. I mean, in Switzerland, okay, maybe we want to use agroscope to go to agroecology. Sorry, it's not going to work, right? We need to make feeble the agroscope, or I don't know, maybe give feeble the money agroscope gets, and then maybe things will change. But you cannot imagine a radical change of paradigm if you don't change the research, development, extension, for example. These are institutions which are very much ingrained everywhere, doing still old-fashioned research, mostly. I mean, not 100%, but a lot, if you look what's going on out there. I think in the USDA, I think there's some numbers. In the US, is maybe, 1 or 2% maybe of the money is actually used in sort of toward organic and sustainable agriculture. So how do you think they're going to change? Where is the knowledge going to come from to make those changes? And I think the money is not even the issue either, because if you start to reallocate subsidies for change, then money is already there, just use it differently.
Angelika, can I just maybe add an unexpected notion to this? 3 days ago, the board of Biology, the German Industry Association for Food Without Genetic Engineering, decided that we will make a major effort with the weight, with the clout that this association has, to make sure that the new breeding techniques, which we were discussing in the last few minutes, that this will fall under the category of, as in the past, genetic engineering, and not something that is to be swept under the carpet. Nobody in Germany, I mean, when did this whole tsunami, this only happened 2 years ago. Before that, nobody discussed it. So there has been very little time for any public debate, compared to back 96, way before 1996, when the first GMOs were commercialized. There were several years of public debate. Now, all of a sudden it was there. And nobody so far in industry circles has said anything. And we have decided, and mind you, this is very powerful, we represent 182 billion euros of sales. And that is big. And we decided just a few days ago, we haven't decided yet exactly which method to use, but we will do something to make this publicly.
You would definitely favor that it falls under regulations for...
Absolutely.
For...
Before you end your sentence, absolutely.
Okay. I wanted to add why.
No, but let me tell you very quickly. About 3-4 weeks ago, we, as the board, invited a small group of scientists, some promoters, and some con GMOs, and we had a privatissime of lectures given to us, so that we could form an opinion, because none of us are scientists. So, but we had to have a position. And we managed very easily to have a unanimous decision or unanimous position, and this is something that we will publicize now.
Let me ask you the question again, why is that? Because the industry sees this as an added benefit? Because
this is exactly the core question that needs to be asked, because the 300 odd members or 400 odd members that we have range from a small egg producer to the #1 retailer in Germany, which everybody knows their name if you know Germany a little bit, is Edeka, right? All of these people in between are members, and to them, if there were a major section of new, if I may say it like that, GMOs coming in that cannot be detected, that are not regulated, etc., well then, first of all, our association, of course, is not a purpose in itself. It serves industry, it serves consumers, but the whole thing would collapse. You know, we could not maintain our claims anymore. This little thing, I don't know if you can see it,
exactly.
that is now on more than 4,500 products in German retail stores.
Can you say what it is?
It says ohne Gentechnik, for those of you who say, well, you can translate it, means without genetic engineering. And this is sound, this is not just some claim that is made like that. It is based on a German law, which refers again to EU regulations.
So that label sells?
I beg your pardon?
That label sells?
That label sells like hotcakes.
Yes, which I think interestingly brings us right back to the question of that I think you have been eloquently writing about and thinking about, the conform or transform issue. I mean, I see an emerging, at least in our circle, we have a consensus, right? Or we have an emerging consensus even beyond, that we will have to change the agri-food systems, because we run out of all essential resources that go into it, oil, water, what have you, energy, and so on. The question, so that's not a question really anymore that is hotly debated. The question is only when, and the more contentious question is how. Where do we move on then? Do we move towards the visions that some of you have laid out, greening the conventional, or going radical, farmerless? I think it was you who said the farmers are reduced, or somebody else. Well, it is the explicit vision of some industrial package providers who are now entering also big data. By Monsanto concretely is buying up big data corporations, climate corporations, is in Silicon Valley, has been buying up computing organizations, and want to offer menu-driven solution packages where the farmer sits on the farmer isn't a farmer anymore, he makes decisions from a computer, and the whole robotics steered precision agriculture package is offered, serviced, and licensed through technology companies, so that companies like Monsanto are moving from an input industry to a technology provider and package provider industry, which doesn't have farmers explicitly not in the picture anymore, or the farmer operates from the comfort of his or her couch. That's one vision, okay? Or desk, or whatever it is, or car, you know? And the other one is what we've been talking about, where more consensus is among us here. How do we reconcile this? How is that moving with you?
I can recommend one thing that has to be done, which has been mentioned, in which is in all the case studies. The harmful agents, whether it's asbestos, PCBs, CFCs, lead in petrol, whatever it is, by the time the research proves that it's a big problem, all the decades prior to that, it's in the marketplace at a sub-price, at a cheap and subsidized price. Subsidized sometimes by tax dollars at the front end from public research, and then subsidized secondly because the costs of the pollution are borne by victims and taxpayers and future generations. So when, for example, fossil fuels right now, it doesn't have anything like the full value of the costs of fossil fuels, the health effects, the climate change. If it did, the fossil fuel industry will be finished in 10 years. The UK Treasury has internally a price of £80, a carbon tax of £80 per tonne of CO2 as capturing some of these externalities. So what you have to do is stop the harmful agent being cheap. That means confronting the issue of cheap food. The consumer probably could be led to believe that it's not really cheap if it's destroying the environment and it's unhealthy. And so you then put a tax on food that's produced in a disturbing way, or you do it another way and say to Monsanto, if you really think GE is harmless, do what the mining companies have to do when they open a mine, which is they put a very big bond into the financial markets, which is the mining companies if it doesn't make a mess with the land. Usually, of course, they do make a mess with the land, so the bond is there to guarantee that they will put back nature 50 years later when they've done the mine. We say to Monsanto, put a 50 billion bond in the markets and it's yours. It's yours with interest in 50 years' time if there are no hazards from GM. And that gives Monsanto an incentive to actually do the proper research to make sure there's no hazards from GM, because they then get the bond back. But we know that what will happen is Monsanto would say, oh, we're not doing that because it's really kind of harmless, our product. And then the public says, you mean you don't believe your own rhetoric? If you believed your own rhetoric, you'd place the bond. And it's not utopian, this. It happens for oil, it happens for nuclear, it happens for mining, as I've said. It's not a revolutionary idea. It's just anticipating future harm and making the polluter put up money at the front end. That gives them then an incentive to do the research to guarantee them that they get the money back in 50 years. But in practice, of course, it helps to get rid of that harmful agent from the marketplace. But once harm does begin to appear, you internalize it with a tax. That's the way we got rid of, or reduced the smoking stuff and all the rest of it.
Two people want to say something?
Yes, okay. Yes, I mean, Angelika described the shift in the agricultural supply industry, from supplying a set of inputs to supplying technology packages, where farmers then are offered the supposed advantages of having more precise control over the conditions and the inputs from some computer surveillance or electronic surveillance of conditions. Well, let's look at what this means historically. I mean, there are precedents of two kinds which seem to be converging here. One is, I remember at least 2 decades ago, there was the rise of precision agriculture, also known as rational agriculture, whereby the chemical inputs would be more precisely controlled according to some surveillance of potential threats from changes in weather or pests or whatever, in order to reduce the chemical inputs and therefore save money and minimize environmental pollution and so on. But that's one kind of precedent which seems to be now more automated in these systems. But the other precedent, which perhaps puts a different light on the supposed advantages, is the much longer history of industry in general, of industrialization, as described by Karl Marx, whereby the producers are reduced from skilled workers to under-laborers. It is subordinated to the rationality of an efficient machine production. This concept was taken up by Jack Kloppenberg in his book First the Seed, published around 1988, where he described firstly US farmers as being turned into propertied under-laborers, meaning paradoxically, they still own the farm, now own more and more equipment, also known as fixed capital, which was then seen as essential in order to increase productivity to compete in the market, at the same time as their labor was being structured and subordinated to that efficiency imperative built into the whole mechanical system linked to the market system. So that's why he calls them property under-laborers. And now we see these technology packages taking that tendency one step further, which then may mean more skills in operating a computer, but even less knowledge than before about the natural resources, the environment, seed biodiversity, and so on. And so continues the long-term trend of greater dependence by farmers upon some external supplier.
As a business model, de-skilling is what
Yes, yes.
I think I will open it now to the audience, because I do see hands coming up here, and would like, is somebody carrying the microphones? Okay, Jack in the back. Not in the box, in the back.
I'm very interested in this discussion about economic levers for transformational change. I'm not sure that there is such an economic lever. It may require other kinds of approaches. But one of the differences between agroecology and the industrialized model is that agroecology bears the costs of what the industrial model can externalize, if I understand the message. And it seems to me that lots of countries have tax laws that make some things legitimately business expenses and some things that are not legitimately business expenses. Would it be possible through a tax structure to simply say certain kinds of inputs into agriculture, like chemical formulations of pesticides, are no longer a legitimate business deduction, providing incentives to convert on a fair playing field to the same kinds of costs that agroecological farmers are already bearing?
Is there any particular person you want to pose that question to, or is that a general?
Should I keep going, Angelika?
No, please not.
Half of my life I spent on ecological tax reform, which is brought to the attention by everybody by Professor Ernst von Weizsäcker in his fabulous book in 1970 called Ecological Tax Reform. It's about this thick, a very thin book, very erudite. It makes a simple point that since the Industrial Revolution, we have raised taxes on labour, and productivity of labour as a result has also gone up because labour becomes more and more expensive, so the research innovation direction is saving labour. We have not taxed nature. We only do two things in life. We just grow up and use nature in one way or the other. We have not taxed nature at all. So nature has been free and heavily subsidized. So nature is cheap, generally speaking, and labour is expensive. Not surprisingly, we haven't innovated in getting better and smarter at using less nature for more good output, not the narrow output, but the good output that you talked about. One way to shift the system, and of course the third problem is me. I'm part of things called the aging population. Born 1947, there's millions of us. As we go from 65 to 90 years of age, we're going to be such a huge burden on the working population, such that workers to pensioners goes from 3 to 1 in about 25 years. And so the workers will not put up with my pensions, my bills and so on, based on income tax. So we have to, for that reason, shift a lot of tax onto consumption of nature. Because even when I'm 90, I'm still eating, so I'm still paying a little bit of tax, as opposed to 65 years of age when I retire. So you shift tax from people to nature. And out of that, you shift the driver of innovation towards saving less people, because employing 9 billion people is going to be a bit of a problem, and using less nature, which is dwindling in relation to population. And then you apply it specifically. So you put big taxes on pesticides. Maybe start small. The Danes have used the taxes on pesticides very effectively. So as soon as something looks harmful, with a little bit of evidence, put a small tax on and say it's going to increase. Because we know from the history of harm, the harm will always increase. So you start small. The revenues, instead of going into perhaps the ordinary treasury, you use the revenues to fund the research that we've been calling for. And that makes pesticides more expensive, you get a research flow, and thereby you begin to squeeze out the cheap thing. You put your finger on it, Jack. Conventional agriculture is subsidized so much by not paying its real costs. Agroecology seems to be accommodating and building in most of its costs into the prices of its products, really. I hope that's clear.
Anybody confused or has no questions? Okay.
Yes,
If
and
people
further
have
to
questions,
the,
raise your arms and then...
and And further to the agroecological alternatives, what is the knowledge basis? Well, it starts necessarily from farmers' collective knowledge and exchange among them. This is by contrast with conventional agricultural research. Proper research in agroecological methods starts from trying to understand what are the practices already in use in a specific context. Why do some practices work better than others in terms of protecting plant health, increasing yields, and so on? What works better or worse? And then the more scientific question, why? Why does it work in this way, in this particular context? How can that knowledge be generalized so that it is more useful to farmers in other contexts? And that's why scientists are needed, to develop some general lessons from the specific experiences, and that can facilitate the knowledge exchange among farmers.
Okay, whoever has the
So we've heard this morning that the main issues with these molecular plant breeding techniques are risk assessment and regulation based and not inherent to the actual techniques themselves. And then we've heard this afternoon a call for more holistic farming practices. To me, the take-home message from this is that we shouldn't be abandoning these new techniques, but rather looking for a more thoughtful approach to their use. I was wondering if anybody on the panel has an opinion in this direction.
I'm the moderator.
Well, you know, I think we forget always that we have to look what is the need, what is the problem, and then you go and look for a solution. But very often we have a technology and we say, okay, what can we do with this thing? I think that's what's happened. So I think we have to do much more the discussion, go on farm, talk with the farmers, and so figure out, okay, what is the problem here? We needs to be solved, and then people have to work together. I think we know since years now that we should change the way we do the research to begin with. Sure, if there is a good tool who can help solve a problem, then it has to be used. I mean, so I think that's the approach, rather than to go look. You know, there's a saying that if you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. So.
And in an ivory tower environment, which we are at a university in a way, your question that you've just raised is absolutely legitimate. But then I come with the information that I had before, not I as a person, but the information is there, namely, commercially speaking, science actually serves society, at least last time I checked, right? And in a way, at the end at least. And society, and there is of course great differences from country to country within Europe, but consumers just don't want GMOs. So therefore, the new part that you were addressing there, commercially speaking, there is no room for that. Okay, I don't know, the future will tell what the reality will bring, but that's another aspect not to leave out of sight.
Yeah. I want to backtrack and also connect some of the dots. Hans mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals and others mentioned them too. I think it's striking that food and agriculture is implicated in all the problems and important for all the Sustainable Development Goals, where we talk about those related to the biosphere, society, or the economy. So everyone's affected. That's my first point. The second point is that I've given up on the idea that it's a group of experts, whether well-meaning or not, who should be in charge of what we do next. I think we need, at a time of immense uncertainty, unpredictability, to move towards a more post-normal science, where facts are uncertain and vested interests are huge and values are in dispute. And with that, it's quite important in my mind to recognize that we all have in this room, whether a scientist, a policymaker, or a farmer, partial and incomplete knowledge. And that's okay, but we have partial and incomplete knowledge. So how can we develop more collective forms of intelligence that bring together the different bits of knowledge of farmers, scientists, policymakers, artists, people from other countries? And I think the kind of problems we're faced with call for that kind of revolution in innovation, that we create spaces where it's possible for collective intelligence to emerge. Now that presupposes taking to the streets, the schools, the factories, the offices, all these debates. I mean, that's a metaphor. But it means socializing these debates much, much more, because they're important for everyone. And part of the problem I see over the last 30 years is that an expertocracy, and I've been part of that, have been in charge, and we've been interpreting reality and proposing solutions on the basis of our partial and limited knowledge. I hope no one gets offended. I mean to say this constructively. We have to find ways of bringing in multiple perspectives and creating dynamics that are much more inclusive of different knowledge systems, knowledge holders, in developing solutions for food, agriculture, and human well-being, because they're enormous value-laden questions. They're matters of societal choice. These are matters for citizens, in the broadest sense, to sort out for themselves. And there will be a need for science. There will be a need for, molecular biologists who work on market technology to improve plant breeding. There will be a need for economists, but it's a different relationship that we need to create between knowledge systems and their authority to influence policy making and institutional choices. So I return to my theme to the need to democratize the debate. We need to create safe spaces for all the citizenry, men and women, young and old, to be involved in shaping the future. I think that is important because there's a huge democratic deficit at this point in time. At the same time, it is important to continue the critical work. The corporations are organizing because food, agriculture, water, natural resources, huge markets. In India, something like 70 to 80% of the seeds of food crops are farm saved. Hey, that's a lot of competition for the industry. Wipe it out. And much of the industrial strategies are geared towards that. The new packages Les was mentioning are also part of this process of further commodification of nature and social relations. So, solving that issue depends very much on the balance of social forces. So how do we support the emergence of a critical citizenry to impose their own visions in all their diversity on the kind of food, agricultures, plural, they would want. I think that's the hardest challenge we have, but at this point in time, given all the warning signals we have for the planet, for differences in wealth, the have and have-nots, this is quite critical.
Ich möchte gerne von meinen beiden Vorrednern diese allgemeine Aussagen versuchen, auf das Saatgut etwas runterzubrechen, zu verdichten. Und dort haben wir eben, eigentlich, wie es Herren schon gesagt hat, dort haben wir heute eigentlich die Situation, dass die meiste Züchtung findet heute eigentlich in privater Hand statt und ist ökonomisch orientiert. Das heißt, die Züchter versuchen eigentlich für ihre Produkte einen Markt zu finden, mit welchen Methoden und wie auch immer, das sei dahingestellt. Aber das läuft eben gerade nicht so in den meisten Teilen der Welt, abgesehen da, wo eben noch selbstgewonnenes Saatgut eingesetzt wird, dass man sich dann an dem Problem orientiert und auf das dann hin gezüchtet wird. Wir hatten diese Situation, zumindest in Europa, lange Zeit mit einer öffentlichen Züchtung, die eigentlich vom Staat, also von der Allgemeinheit getragen wurde. Und es hat sich immer mehr man hat immer mehr abgegeben, gerade auch in dem Buch von Jack Frokenborg, was erwähnt wurde, ist es sehr schön geschildert, was in Amerika gelaufen ist, dass die Industrie eigentlich immer mehr die Führung übernommen hat und heute hat der Staat nur noch die kostenintensive Vorarbeit zu leisten, Grundlagenforschung zu betreiben und wenn es um den Profit geht, dann kommt die Industrie. Und hier wäre eben die Gesellschaft gefordert, eigentlich zu sagen, wir wollen, dass wieder mehr Geld eingesetzt wird für eine Züchtung, aber für eine Züchtung, die den Problemen dient, die wir eigentlich heute haben.
Ich fand es sehr interessant. Letzte Woche war in Berlin eine Veranstaltung der Deutschen Agrarforschungsallianz und da wurden Züchter von Wissenschaftlern auch gefragt, ob sie denn jetzt diese neuartigen Methoden, eben vor allen Dingen CRISPR, unbedingt bräuchten, um wettbewerbsfähig zu bleiben. Das wurde verneint und die Diskussion lief dann häufig darauf hinaus, dass das, was die Züchter wirklich gerade umtreibt, das sind die geistigen Eigentumsrechte, von denen sie sich in ihrer Arbeit massiv behindert fühlen. Also es ist gerade weniger auch die Suche nach einer technologischen Methode, die alle Probleme lösen soll, sondern es ist wirklich auch ein Struggle mit den Rahmenbedingungen, in denen Züchtung heute stattfindet, wo die Großen aufgrund ihrer Macht und ihrer politischen Einflussmöglichkeiten sich einen Rahmen geschaffen haben, wo sie sehr gut arbeiten können, andere aber in ihrer Arbeit massiv behindert werden.
Thank you. It's very interesting. I think I ought to just give some of my background because I'm going to be somewhat critical about some of the comments that have been made this afternoon. My name's Lawrence Woodward. I began farming organically in 1975. I was a co-founder and director of what's now called the Organic Research Centre in the UK for 30 plus years and have been involved in the development of organic agriculture in the UK and internationally. The reason I give that background is because I'm about to be a little critical of some of the things that I've heard. Firstly, for all that I've seen over the years in studies, although I firmly support the idea of ecological taxes and putting the costs, the true costs of production on food, I've seen nothing in any of those studies that will really be a driver of agricultural change. The total costs are not enough to enable some farmers in some areas, and I would say a significant number of farmers in some areas, it's not enough of an economic driver to enable them, to give them the economic wherewithal to change. So it's a good thing, but it's not a driver of itself. Neither, I somewhat take issue with the idea that farmers know what they're doing and the source of all agricultural knowledge comes from farmers. A hell of a lot does, absolutely. But in my work, and we started doing in the early 80s what's now called participatory research, and we started working with farmers, we had to work very hard to re-skill farmers in the idea of whole systems work, of understanding the whole farm. And we keep coming across these, I don't know how many times I've worked with farmer groups to look at their research agenda. The same things come up over and over again. Weed control is always number one. Yeah, actually, the answers to weed control on agroecological farms is simple. It's structural rechange. It's altering the system, the crops they grow and how they do it. The reasons they don't do it is because they've got this economic lock-in and they've got a certain mindset that needs changing. That's very hard to get that across. It comes down to what Michel's just talked about input in terms of education and shared knowledge. Similarly, consumers or citizens don't understand whole systems. A couple of years ago, the EU carried out a citizens' survey on what they wanted out of organic agriculture. The overwhelming response, most of the responses came from France actually, the overwhelming response showed a complete lack of understanding of whole systems. What they wanted was end product analysis of pesticide residues, or maybe GMO residues. The fact that those kinds of things put extra bureaucratic burdens on farmers played no part in the consideration. The fact that what really causes farmers difficulties, economically and in terms of agronomic skills, is managing whole systems. The people who responded to that survey did not understand. So if you want real transformation, as Michel said, we've got to find new ways of engaging, educating, working with, developing wide range of communal knowledge, not just with farmers, but also with citizens, with end users. And the biggest gap I see, obstacle I see in transformation, isn't actually research. It's the economic system, the political economy lock-in, as Hans said earlier, but it's actually this citizens and engagement with a more intelligent, discussion about how to bring about alternatives. At the end of the day, it's worldview, it's about a clash, a conflict of ideology and worldview. That requires real engagement with citizens at a grassroots level, and that's what I think is missing. That's the biggest block to transformation.
Yeah, yes, I agree wholeheartedly, and it's great that you made those points because they were just simmering beneath the surface. But just on the last one about citizens, having taken part in the UK referendum on the EU, I know the depths of low quality reporting, low quality discussion, low quality involvement. I know what it looks like. If I was an American, I can see what low quality public discourse looks like over the water. Something must be done. In the 1970s, I was so fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to initiate, roll out, and make happen a mass program of teaching shop stewards in workplaces about risk, because they had not a clue about it. They assumed if anybody gets hurt at work, it's their fault. They came with a fault blaming. We organised a 10-day day release in colleges of further education training course for 25,000 reps per year by the time I finished in a 4-year programme. We must have trained 250,000 people in about 5 years. And that was blessed by the government paying the lecturers to do the teaching, and the government paying the trade unions to help organise this stuff. You know, I taught the trainers to go and teach the courses and so on, and the employers had to pay the workers to leave the workplace and go into the colleges 1 day a week for 10 weeks. That's the 1970s. We've not got those circumstances, but we have a broad and growing fear amongst ordinary people, really, about the move towards right-wing demagogy, about the role of how the internet can make views polarised and so on. Your concern and my concern is shared actually by a lot of people. I think there could be the wherewithal to say, why don't we have a Citizens for the Environment crash course? And it wouldn't just be workers, it would be citizens. We couldn't manage 10 days, we could probably manage 1 day of good stuff in the colleges, face-to-face stuff, not through technology and so on, and roll it out. And I think it could take off. And of course it would have to broaden itself, looking at what's happening to democracies and so on, to Citizens for Democracies. You know, you try and wrap in a broad, holistic approach to, you know, how do you function in society? How are decisions taken? What do you eat every day? What kind of work do you do? Where does it all come from? And how is it all interconnected? And it's not really rocket science. I'm sure we could manage to do that over a 10-year period and end up with maybe 5 or 10%, 15% of all our populations being just that much better informed than they were before. And then they can go and spread that message to the other 85%.
I think we should start in schools, actually. Yeah. You want to say?
Yeah, I just want to mention, you know, who informs the citizens? That's one of the questions. And again, if you look at the media, who controls the media and who is behind all this? I mean, who tells people that an apple has to be perfect? And because people believe that the apple has to be perfect, that's why then farmers spray 17 times, as I just read in Switzerland yesterday in the paper. I mean, it's crazy. And why? Because mostly it's cosmetic. So you have to look who is behind all this and why do people react the way they do. So I think that's one problem. And then if people start to react, say something, then who comes out? The big media again and blame Greenpeace for brainwashing people, right? I mean, so I think we have a problem. Now, what's important also is not that then we try to inform the public general. Where are our parliamentarians and politicians? I think we have to have more dialogue with these people. And I know there's at least 2, maybe in the room here, maybe 3, I don't know. But we need, as scientists, and I think also spend more time working with our policymakers and explain to them, because they're just as ignorant quite often as the general public, or misinformed by a biased media operation which is going on, as we see every day in our papers.
Thank you. We have, where's the microphone?
Here. Hi. We have a whole nation that has been eating GMOs for 20 years. Why aren't we going there? And are we afraid of what we might find? And I think you guys all know it.
Okay, so why don't we go to the US and study the people in the US? Unethical. There is no control group. We need a United States that went through the same thing without GMOs in order to make a scientific study. Otherwise, we would become what the others are, you know, which we don't want to become. Brazil, well, still at it. Yeah, somebody, go ahead.
Earlier today, we heard about non-GM supply chains, and Brazil has a crucial role because southern Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, is a place for intensively cultivating Monsanto's GM soya. Northern Brazil supplies the non-GM. So there could be a comparison, and perhaps Brazilian researchers have already been doing this. It's worth checking.
Where's the microphone? Okay.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je suis Madame Zongaline, je viens du Burkina. C'est un peu pour partager avec vous aussi ce qui se passe au Burkina par rapport à l'agroécologie. Et j'ai écouté ce qui se dit ici. Il y a beaucoup de ressemblances, mais il y a certaines choses que je n'arrive pas à comprendre beaucoup. Et chez nous, on est beaucoup plus apte à nous réorienter vers l'agroécologie parce que nous vivons déjà dans un milieu où il y a beaucoup d'effets liés au changement climatique et une grande dégradation des ressources humaines et des ressources naturelles qui sont vraiment très attaquées. Mais on se rend compte que pour que cette manière de vivre qui est, ou bien de produire de façon agroécologique puisse prendre, il faut qu'on arrête de penser les produits agroécologiques comme des produits de luxe et que ça soit pris comme des produits normaux. Parce que c'est ce qui se passe un peu chez nous. Les produits bio, les produits de l'agroécologie, c'est perçu comme des produits de luxe et c'est réservé à des personnes qui ont un certain niveau de revenus. Mais tant que nous n'allons pas normaliser la consommation de ce type de produits et les prendre comme des produits luxueux, je ne pense pas qu'on pourra revivre et vivre avec cette manière de produire pour tout le monde et que ça soit en utilisant toujours les produits issus la production avec les pesticides, les autres comme des produits normaux et facilement accessibles. Oui, il faut arriver à toucher tous les segments du marché, arriver à toucher tous les acteurs pour qu'on puisse revenir dans la consommation vraiment des produits agroécologiques comme un effet normal et non un effet luxueux. C'est ce que je voulais dire.
Here it's necessary to distinguish between organic food, meaning certified organic, and agroecological production. I mean, certified organic is usually more expensive for many reasons. Partly the administrative and financial costs of getting certification for the farm, the 5-year delay in the transition, the lower yield, usually, compared to the high external input agriculture and other reasons. So there are efforts, and should be more efforts, to reduce the cost of organic food. But this is also a problem because that often means importing the organic food from outside Europe, which then creates a competitive pressure against the organic producers within Europe. So that's a very difficult problem. Agroecological production is potentially much broader and can be increased, is increasing. The problem there is somewhat different. It isn't necessarily more expensive, but there is a problem of distribution. It needs dedicated supply chains, that is short food supply chains, which bring consumers closer to producers in such a way that the value added in the quality and environmental sense, the value added by the farmer, is not lost so much to intermediaries. So there are farmers markets, box schemes, and now a form of certification called participatory guarantee systems, which provide a kind of surveillance, support, and citizen involvement in promoting the whole supply chain back to the production. So that could be an important way to achieve the aim that you are advocating.
Thank you. I see that Urs is burning to say something.
No, I'm not going to talk about genome editing, about precision farming, of course. I'm a little bit concerned that sometimes you look at a problem only from one angle, and an example is precision farming. The point was made by Angelika and by Les. Les and I, we share a lot of literature, and we cite each other very often, but nonetheless, you can look at precision farming from different angles. So it cannot be only mentioned in the framework of industrialized, intensive work packages. I always show the example of Douglas Tompkins and his 3,000 hectare organic farm in Argentina, where he used precision farming, meaning GPS, GIS, sensor, camera, and big data steered machines to create perfect agroecological landscape, a completely new biodiversity, and even the perfect organic system, because he creates with contour and strip farming crop rotations not only in time but also in space on the same field. So in a way, this is technology used for agroecology and best organic farming systems. So I think this is very important. The purpose for what we use innovation is one of the most important questions.
I think also we don't have a contradiction there, and I think Hans has been saying it before, that the technologies, there is not an opposition to the technology itself. It's only if you only perceive solutions to problems through technology lenses, and then the technology becomes actually the center of it as a business model. But if we're all clear on and have come to an agreement where we want to head with our agriculture, then of course technologies and anything that can help to achieve those solutions will be looked at. You know, it's just a different type of how you look at the technologies. Like the example you probably allude to that I brought with Monsanto selling the packages, that's going with the technology and then looking for what can I solve with it. Profit maximized. That's the issue that I question. But if we have come to an agreement that we redesign our landscape and we bring agroecology back into or restructure and transform our agricultural systems, why not? Yes, of course. Anything that helps to achieve that goal is fine in my view. And I think we don't have a dissent here on this. We're all in consensus. We have 3 minutes left. There was a lady behind you. I don't know, who keeps track of behind you, Florian? She had her hand up. Yvonne, I leave it up to you to make the decision who gets the... Oh, she has it already. I'm sorry.
It's a completely different, well, not different angle. If the title is Innovation and Missing Research in Agroecology, I was asking myself also about the drivers. Drivers for transformation we were discussing. And agroecology is everything about biodiversity and closed cycles. But I think what's mostly a little bit missing in the discussion is the social cycles. About all the CSAs, we know they exist, but shouldn't we put much more impact in the development of this community-supported agriculture as one way of a driver in agroecology? I just give you an example. We see these examples in the South, but also, for example, in South Korea, where there is such a thing, like 500,000 of people, of consumers being in this CSA Hansalim with about 3,000 and something farmers, and I was really impressed. And we in Switzerland or in Europe, it's some kind of niche, but I think we should, in the whole discussion, these social networks shouldn't be just a little niche we also talk about.
Michel and Hans, and then I think we will have to wrap it up.
Yeah, I very much agree with what you're saying, Florian. It's interesting that there has been recently a study done throughout Europe, north, south, east, west, looking at short food chains. So this includes CSAs, Community-Supported Agriculture, AMAP, Association pour le maintien de l'agriculture paysanne, farmer markets, and other innovations that bring producers and consumers together all across Europe. And what's fascinating, that from this study, which was commissioned by the European Union, there are lots of social benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. More importantly, within the context of this discussion, perhaps, is that these turn out to be appropriate market outlets for agroecological producers as well as organic farmers. The CFS, or rather the CSM, the civil society mechanism to the CFS, has just produced a very interesting report on connecting with markets. So the idea of farmer markets, CSA, short food chains, regional markets that provide income earning opportunities for farmers around the world. And an important idea here is the need to re-embed markets within territories, in rural, peri-urban and urban spaces. So these are important levers. I was mentioning earlier public procurement schemes, which are tremendously powerful in making accessible good food, organic food or agroecologically produced food to all social classes when you have a public procurement system that connects producers with schools as well as hospitals and prisons. And this is well within the power of municipalities. Italy has had a fantastic public procurement program, and the city of Rome was sourcing through municipal decision food from neighboring organic farms and providing most of the schools in Rome. And this goes back to your point, the need to make sure that these foods are accessible to all social classes, including very excluded groups. And this is particularly important in Europe, given that there's a very strong connect between the food we eat and the health problems that are appearing, of eating too much of the wrong foods, not having enough minerals, but also food poverty in many parts of Europe. That's another big issue that needs to be solved by making good food available to all social classes, because usually the poorer you are, the worse you eat. In the UK, middle-class people eat 3 times more vegetables and fruit than working-class people. But within that, what you're saying, Florian, that lever of how do you create proximity relations between producers and consumers and innovative forms of economic exchange. Some can be money-based, some can be based on, barter, etc. There are new forms emerging. I think this is a very, very important lever for change, and well within, the means of groups of citizens and farmers, but also sympathetic municipal government. I have less faith about national governments, I must say, but working with municipal and provincial governments, there can be a lot of change.
Thank you very much. Hans, you have the last word.
Just one more point. A good way of popularizing agroecology and healthy food are the chefs. And I think there's a lot going on there, to actually get people to understand and know and taste what good food is. So I think in addition to what you just mentioned, I think there's another outlet there, and that's working quite well in many, many countries. As you know, there's a lot of organic restaurants, or even at the UN, Dan Barber, which is a very well-known chef in New York, was there talking about his experience with the farmers, how he goes to the farm, how basically he managed to make sure that there's a market for all the different things the farmer has to grow in a 4 or 5 year rotation. So just to say, so I think there is this other additional thing which you see coming up all over the place. So I think we are moving, but somehow I think it needs to be supported still and move faster.
Thank you very much. We are moving. That is a nice last word, and he's doing some advertisement. Learn the lessons from early mornings. That is a good last thing too. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for discussing, and we have to clear the place now because we have other actions coming up. Thank you.